Welcome back to another episode of ATTV. I'm your host, Ben McLeod, founder of Convey Bio. I'm joined today by Rohin Iyer of Marken, and he is the Senior Director of the Global Cell and Gene Therapy Advanced Therapies Division. Rohin, it's great to be here with you today.
Likewise, great to be here. Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. So let's jump into it. And just in terms of the emerging trends and key advancements, this has been a theme with a lot of different folks that we've had over the last couple days. What are you seeing that you think is really important for people to focus on in terms of the trends inside of the space?
Yeah, so there's definitely been some really cool trends that I've heard about. The first of them, I think, is that people are demanding shorter manufacturing times, right? So you see the emergence of what we used to see was a 14 to 21 day manufacturing process for, let's say, a CAR T therapy or a cell therapy. And we're now seeing that shortened, right? Some therapeutic developers have shortened it by a couple of days. Others are starting to develop processes that are down to just 2 days, 3 days, and even 1 day manufacturing times. And that really does suggest that, getting therapies to patients is now the new priority, right? As quickly as possible. So that's the biomanufacturing side of things. And in addition to that, allogeneic therapy is still a relevant concept, I think. In terms of how quickly that's going to make it to the clinic, I think there are several players there that are vying for that. But at the same time, there's definitely a lot of interest in, momentum in the allogeneic therapy space to be able to democratize access to these cell therapies in a much larger patient population. In the supply chain and logistics field, I think that the biggest innovations are really in the packaging space, as well as in real-time visibility. So it's no longer sufficient for our customers to be able to see what happened 2 days ago to their shipment. They need to know what's happening to it right now in real time. So I think we're starting to see some new packaging systems, some new offerings from clients in that space, as well as just new capability development. A lot of supply chains around storage needs, and it's around teams building new locations and hubs across the world. So we're going to see a lot more of that as time goes on in the field.
Yeah, it's crazy to see even over the last couple of years, right? Going from like 14 days, 21 days down to 3. Really exciting in terms of really making sure that if you're making autologous therapy or something like that, you're getting it as quickly as possible, less opportunity for something to go wrong.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And then, it's interesting even inside of the logistics space, like for 10, 15 years at this point, we've had Google Maps.
Right.
And we're used to being able to see where we are in real time. And so it's good that it's finally coming to these very fragile, delicate therapeutics as well. So in terms of, those are kind of some good news trends.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, what would you say are some of those critical gaps that still need to be filled?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of momentum in sort of developing novel therapeutic modalities, but what we're also seeing is, gaps in terms of, patients ultimately are still suffering from debilitating diseases, and we still want to get these therapies to patients in as earlier lines of therapy. So we had some great approvals this past year. I think we had like several gene therapy and several cell therapy approvals that came through, which is great for the field, right? We're all rooting for that. But we've also seen them move into earlier lines of therapy. And I think that that's still a game that we need to wait and see how that's going to play out, because a lot of these patients have already exhausted all of their lines of therapy. So we need to see the regulatory bodies recognize that that is the only way forward. And that's a gap that I think is yet to be fully addressed in some ways. So getting patients to get their therapies quicker by making them the first line or second line of therapy is now the new trend, I think, that's going to address that gap. In the supply chain space, I mentioned this earlier, but real-time visibility is no longer an option. And we really need to have not just the data loggers and the technology around the packaging to be able to enable that, but we need some human intervention capabilities, I think, as well. And that isn't something that people have really put a lot of thought into, in my mind. At Marken, we do have control towers, 24/7 control towers that allow us to monitor the shipment and to intercede in the event of, let's say, a shipment is offloaded from a cargo a desk, or if it's left on the tarmac. We know that that's happening because we have a human that's actually tracking and tracing that. But I still see gaps in that field, to be honest with you, and I feel like we need to be more cognizant of the potential pitfalls in supply chain and logistics that need to be monitored actively by a human.
Yeah, there's been so many horror stories of something slowly thawing out and then getting refrozen, and it doesn't seem like anything's wrong. So,
well, we need a combination of people and technology to be able to avoid those horror stories, so to speak. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and I would agree to your earlier point as well with regards to these therapies moving up to first line or second line. Again, kind of the standard of care right now when you think of radiation or chemo is basically poison the patients because poisoning, because it's going to it's going to hit the cancer cells even harder. So it's kind of this gamble, and at this point we've got something that completely ignores healthy tissue and just goes after something that's bad. And so it only makes sense, like let's move away from poisoning everything and then just adversely impacting cancer cells more, and let's just go after the bad stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. So in terms of the strategies that you guys are looking at then for logistics and making sure that things run smoothly, what are some of those things that you guys focus on and implement to make sure you've got something that's reliable and runs smoothly?
Yeah, so there's several strategies there, right? So we have to have a very, very broad network of operational hubs, right? So, for example, in North America alone, we have 5 hubs within NORAM that deal with cell and gene therapy specifically, and we have a team of almost 100 people that are dedicated to cell and gene therapy, and I think that speaks to the importance that this field has in terms of we're putting resources into this, and I think we need to grow that team, to be honest, to make sure that as we see more approvals come in, more volume come in of patients, more patients means more shipments ultimately, and from Marken's perspective that means that we need to hire people to make sure that we are supporting those shipments, and we need to build our technology arsenal. So it's not sufficient anymore to have a single data logger that operates at one temperature range. We've now got to have a whole arsenal of things that we can use to keep tabs on things and to build our control tower, maybe even incorporate some artificial intelligence tools, some AI tools to take the burden off of the human and remove some of the variability that comes with human intervention, both in the biomanufacturing space as well as in the logistics space, to try and address some of those key gaps. Yeah, and I think lastly I would say that one of the things that's helped, I think, in my line of thinking is just thinking outside the box. Like, how can we leverage our strengths and combine forces? We're not competitors of people in the logistics and biomanufacturing space. We're all here for the same patients. So how can we work better together to bring our collective strengths and recognize our weaknesses and make sure that we are, ultimately serving patients in the end? So I think that mindset has really helped to build that, capability.
Gotcha. So let me double click in on just a little bit on one of those things that you said. Yeah. So obviously AI is very hot and has been the last couple of years. I'd be curious specifically in your space where you think it's going to be most effective.
Well, it's already being used, to be honest with you. I think it just never was called AI until recently. But when you think about algorithms that are used to look at, let's say, biomanufacturing, a bioreactor has certain biomass output, and we can use AI to analyze the reams and reams of data that come off of hundreds and hundreds of patient runs from those bioreactors to do predictive analytics, right? So we can say, for example, that you will never get more than 100 billion cells from this 10-liter reactor or whatever. But you'll never get less than 10 billion cells, and that there are ranges that we can set and sort of predictive outputs that we can do through some in silico modeling that can ultimately determine whether we need to determine a new feed strategy or something, or a perfusion strategy for a bioreactor. In the supply chain and logistics space, it's a little bit of a different usage case. We would probably start to use AI in terms of things like, what are the lanes that have the highest trouble spots, the highest probability of failing, right? Is it because there's a particular weather pattern or geopolitical event in that region that drives failure rates, and can we avoid those lanes or design a supply chain solution that goes around that, or add some additional technology like a data logger, a GPS logger? Some of these things can measure tilt, light, shock, vibration, temperature, so we can use data, and a lot of that data has to be synthesized into an AI-driven strategy to say, okay, how often is a temperature excursion occurring on this particular airline or with this ground freight carrier, and do we want to design a strategy to avoid that in the future using AI and predictive analytics?
Very interesting. Cool. So let's imagine for a second it's the year 2030. Where do you think the space is going to be, kind of more generally for cell and gene therapies, but then how do you think supply chain and logistics will be different now compared to 5 years from now?
It's a really great question. I mean, they're tied at the hip, right? Those two questions. The first of them is that, I see, like I said, a shorter manufacturing time is really where the industry seems to be moving. The vein-to-vein time ultimately determines the success of that patient outcome in many ways. And if they've already been waiting for months with other lines of therapy, weeks and days matter. So I think we're going to start to see shorter manufacturing times, and even in vivo CAR T therapy, which I would say the jury is still out on whether there's any safety risk with the use of lentiviral vectors in patients.
Right.
So we're going to have to look at non-viral strategies for in vivo CAR T, but that really moves the needle in terms of it's no longer a bioreactor that's growing the cells, it's the patient as the bioreactor. And that drives a supply chain strategy. So to address your second question, if we now know that we can treat a patient with an off-the-shelf therapy like an allogeneic therapy or an in vivo CAR T that's driven by, let's say, a lentiviral vector or a non-viral vector, now all of a sudden you're treating that many more patients, but that means that you have to do that many more shipments in a shorter amount of time. So it's directly linked, as I mentioned. So we're going to have to see a more responsive supply chain strategy that goes with that. And that means that we're going to have broader, infrastructure, more people to do the work, and innovative packaging solutions that allow us to serve that need as quickly as possible with really short turnaround times to meet the manufacturing shorter turnaround times associated with manufacturing. Because if we don't do that, then supply chain will be a bottleneck to the manufacturing, and we don't want that shortened manufacturing time frame to be bottlenecked by something that comes downstream of that in that final mile.
Right on. So in terms of the gaps that currently exist inside of supply chain and logistics, where is Marken coming in to help with that?
No, a really good question. So, in several ways, right? One of the things that we're doing is we're expanding our team, right? We recognize that our business has grown by leaps and bounds in the last year. 42% growth is not something to sneeze at. Right. We're pretty proud of that, and I'm proud of that because my team managed that, despite all the constraints that were put on the biotech industry in the last couple of years. I think we came out of that pretty unscathed, thankfully, knock on wood. But at the same time, we can't sustain that forever. We need to be able to grow our team, add capabilities, add people, train those people. We have like a boot camp dedicated to training our team on the biology and not just the supply chain and logistics, and I think that's going a long way. And in terms of innovation, we've onboarded some new data loggers that are really, really cool that give you real-time visibility, which is, I think, no longer an option. Like I said, if I can monitor my Amazon shipment or my Domino's pizza, I should be able to monitor my $4.2 million gene therapy, right? It just makes sense. So
one would expect.
One would hope, at least. And these are devices that are single use. They don't cost a lot of money, but they can give you so much more information in terms of like, where's your therapy? Is it safe? How am I keeping it safe, and what am I doing to address any escalations or deviations that might occur along the way? So we're investing heavily in that technology. And Marken is a data-driven company, so we like to teach our people about the biology, but use the statistics of how well we're doing to drive improvements. So if there's an issue, we get on top of it. We use data and metrics and quality metrics to ultimately address that and strive for continuous improvement in whatever we do. So.
That is great to hear. Well, it's been a pleasure. Two Canadians.
Of course.
Rocking it in Texas.
Are we going to share some maple syrup stories soon? Or?
Well, probably not quite yet. The audience is going to be drifting off.
All right, no worries. We'll do it later.
Although we can kind of make a little diss and say, it's not even any warmer here in Texas.
Yeah, we brought the winter with us, but this is like t-shirt weather for us, right?
Yeah, that's right. Right. Yeah.
We'll bring the Tim Hortons with us next time. No
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for being here with me, Rohin. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.